Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin daf Samachay. Today's daf is sponsored by Hadar Hecht in loving memory of Michal Ruth Bat Itamar Yitzchak and Ada Etel and Tova Bat Aryeh Yitzchak the Sarah. Tova Bat Aryeh Yitzchak the Sarah. We're continuing to learn for the safety of our soldiers, the residents of the South and the North and the whole country, the safe return of the captives, in memory of those who have fallen, and for Fuash Lema to all those injured. Okay, we are now going to get started with the bottom of yesterday's daf. We were learning about this case. We had a machlok at Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, which we seem to say contradicted their opinion somewhere else, about if somebody says, I betrothed one of my daughters, I'm not sure which one, or I betrothed my older daughter, I betrothed my younger daughter. Let's just stick with the older case because it's really the same for the older and the younger. I betrothed my older daughter if he has two wives with two groups of daughters, and the older ones are older than the second wife's kids. And he said older, did he mean any one of the older ones? Did he mean the older one of the second wife? And according to Rabbi Meir, yes, he could have meant all of those, just not the very last one, the very youngest. According to Rabbi Yossi, and that's because Rabbi Meir holds the way we understood Rabbi Meir anyway until now, based on this machlok that they had we saw it by Pesach, ad pnei Pesach, do people leave their words ambiguous, which means when he said Dolai, could have meant any one of them. Rabbi Yossi says people don't leave their words ambiguous. If he said older, he meant the oldest. Okay, and then we saw their opinions were the opposite in the case of Pesach. You say until before Pesach, and then we said, well, that shouldn't bother us because just switch the opinions. If they appear the exact same thing but flipped, well, it must be that we messed up who said what in the other case. Now we're going to hear Abaye, and then then we're going to bring two questions on Abaye. Amar Abaye. Third line from the end of the daf on Samach Dalet Amud Bet. Machloket b'shtei kitei banot. This is only the machloket is only when, do you mean older or oldest? Only if we're talking about two different families, two wives and two kids. But b'kat echat, if it's one man with one wife, then, and he said, I did the older, divrei hakol gdola mamash, ktana mamash, emtzei b'shma karli. Comes Abaye and he says it's clear if you have just one group of daughters. When you said older, you meant oldest. When you said younger, you meant youngest. Because if you were talking about the middle ones, you would call them middle children. You wouldn't call them older or younger. Kishma karile, right? You would have called her by name. You would have said Emtsait. Amale Rav Ad Barman Abaye. So now we're going to bring two difficulties on Abaye. Ela me'ata Emtsait shebebat shniya tishtare. According to what you're saying, then basically you're saying, when it comes to the group of older daughters, theoretically, the middle one could still be called older because she's older than the other daughters, right, in the second family. But then the middle one of the second family, you would basically say can't be called older because there's no other family to call her older in comparison to. And if she's really only being compared now to her own family, and then she's going to be permitted, the middle one, right? And it didn't say so in the Mishna, that the middle one's permitted. Now, notice the Mishna didn't mention the middle one. But basically what they're saying is, if you meant middle one is going to be permitted in one family, then in the second group, the second family here, where the middle one is only going to be compared to her younger sister, well, you would say that she's called Emtsait, and you wouldn't call her older, and she wouldn't be forbidden. And it doesn't say so in the Mishnah. To which they answer, well, why doesn't it say so in the Mishnah? You're right, it would be. The middle one would be permitted, Abaye would answer. But the Mishnah only talked about an older and a younger. They weren't talking about three daughters in the second family. They were only talking about a case where there were two daughters. That's why the middle one wasn't mentioned. But if the middle one was to be mentioned, it would have been she's permitted. To which they further prove it because they say the following. It also makes sense to say that because what's the Mishnah pointing out? All the ones that are forbidden. So if the middle one were to be forbidden, they would have had to mention her because otherwise you wouldn't know, right? The middle one would be confusing. Where does it go? So the Mishnah is trying to tell you who's forbidden. That's why they didn't mention the middle one, because the middle one's permitted. If really she would have been forbidden, they would have had to mention her. That's Abaye's proof why he's right about his answer. But comes the Gemara and questions that and says, what do you mean? According to what you're saying, if they wanted to forbid the middle one, they would have to mention her. Well, then why didn't they mention the middle one in the first group? The middle one in the first group is forbidden or permitted? Forbidden, obviously, because if the youngest in that family of the first wife is considered potentially older compared to the second family, then the middle one obviously is going to be forbidden. And notice she's not mentioned either. So if you want to say the Mishnah didn't mention her because she's not forbidden, well, she's for sure a case of doubt and is therefore forbidden. But she's not mentioned. So the fact that you're saying her not being mentioned shows it must be she's permitted. Well, it doesn't work for the first group because she's not there and she's forbidden. To which they answer no. That's a bad comparison. Hachi hashta? There's no reason. Now, what's the whole point? The point is we wouldn't have known for sure that she was permitted, right? And as we wouldn't know in the second group, we're not sure where the middle one goes. Is she considered older compared to her younger sister? Or does that not consider her older? The older would only be the oldest one. In the first group, though, it's obvious that she's forbidden. You're not going to say the youngest one is older than the other wife's kids and therefore could be included in older, but the middle one isn't. Nobody would say that. So therefore, they say you can't compare. There, the youngest is forbidden, and obviously the one above her is forbidden. Nobody would even think that. That's why you don't need to mention her, and yet she's going to be forbidden. But that's because it's obvious. But in the second wife's kids, if really she was forbidden, the Mishnah would have brought her up. So this just proves that the middle one, that Abaye is right, that if it's just one family, the middle one is clearly called middle and not older, and therefore there's no concern. And that holds true as well in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah just didn't mention it regarding the second group of daughters. They didn't mention her, and it's proof that if they didn't mention her, it must be she's permitted, because if they wanted to say she was usher, they would have added her to the Mishnah. And don't question from the first case, because the first case is obvious without even stating it, that she's forbidden. Okay, next. Second question against Abaye. Amalei Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua Rava. And by the way, in this difficulty, we're going to answer it in a way that actually answers our previous question. What was our previous question? The Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi say the exact opposite when it comes to Pesach. And in resolving this question, we're going to bring against Abaye. We're going to resolve that question in a different way. Instead of saying switch the opinions, we're going to basically disconnect this machloket from Pesach from our machloket, and basically end up saying these are two different machlokot entirely. Okay, so I'm Rav Huna bered Rav Yeshua Rav. So he says to Rava, basically asking a question on Abaye. Hi Pesach, dechi kat achat dami uplige. Now Abaye said the only machloket is when there's two different groups, because that's what causes more of the confusion. But one family, it would have been clear. Well, Pesach is a case where there's only one group, because it's just one Pesach, and there's still this debate between them what the meaning is. So if you're going to say that bekat achat, they all agree that it's very clear that Dola means oldest, Tana means youngest, and middle is going to be middle and won't be forbidden at all from either one of those. Well, then Pesach, you would say they don't have a machloket either, because there's only one thing that they're disagreeing about. So Amar Lahem, he said, okay, I'm going to re-explain this machloket in Pesach that has nothing to do with our topic, which would then resolve our question from before. Belishna de alma kamiflige. They're not, what did we think about the Pesach debate? We thought, again, it's a matter of, do people leave their words ambiguous? In which case, ad pinei means before, but before what? Before the first day of Pesach or before the end of Pesach? And that's the whole machloket between them, or does someone only say clear statements? If they said before Pesach, they obviously meant before the holiday of Pesach comes in. That's the machloket. But now he suggests that no, that's not the machloket. The machloket is, what do the words ad pinei mean? Notice ad pinei is not lifnei. Lifnei is before. Ad pinei until now we understood until the beginning, which means until before. But mar savar ad pinei Pesach means ad kamei Pesach. So one opinion is it means till before, and that's the opinion that says it's before Pesach. But mar savar ad demifnei Pesach. The word pinei also means to turn, to go away. So the second one says, no. Ad pinei means until it goes away, until Pesach ends. And that the words ad pinei don't mean to before, they mean till the end, just before the end. So that means that their machloket has nothing to do with our machloket. So it resolves, number one, Abaye's issue, which is the issue against Abaye, which is this sounds like one family because there's only one Pesach and they still debate it. Don't worry, this is a totally different debate, and it also resolved the contradiction between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, because here it's a debate about in Pesach, it's a debate about the language. It's not about do people leave their words ambiguous or not. And then we have a totally different explanation there, which then detaches this from our sugya. So what we basically saw so far today was Abaye's opinion that their machloket is only when there's two different wives and two different sets of girls, but not when we're talking about within one wife's children. Because then it's clear, older is oldest, younger is youngest, and middle one would be called the middle. Okay, and we brought two questions against him, but resolved them both. New Mishnah. We're going to have 4 cases in this Mishnah. Again, we're going to have where there's contradictory testimony about the wedding itself. He says, I betrothed you. And she says, I know what you're talking about. You never betrothed me. Now, what happens here? We have no witnesses apparently, or we're going to talk about maybe there was one. I don't know. We're going to get to that later. But right now, seems the only evidence we have to betrothed is his word against her word. He says yes. She says no. So what happens? This is what we talked about this the other day, shavia nafsha chaticha d'isur. You can turn yourself into something forbidden. You can forbid something to yourself and it will be forbidden. If you claim that something's forbidden to you, now right now, by him claiming I'm betrothed to you, what happens? He is now forbidden to all her relatives. He can't marry her sister as long as she's still alive. He can't marry her mother, her daughter, her, right? All sorts of relatives of hers. So he is forbidding all those people to himself. Okay, your question is, don't you always need 2 witnesses in a wedding? That's going to be the whole second part of today's stuff. So hold off on that question. It's an excellent question, and we're going to get to it. That's why I kind of mentioned the Eidim issue, but let's just put it aside right now. So he says, it's his word. He says, I'm betrothed to you. He becomes forbidden to all her relatives because he turned himself, right? He basically forbade certain things to himself. He claims we're married or betrothed, which is enough to basically forbid him to all her relatives. But since she claims no, there was no betrothal, so he muteret bekrovav, kind of a funny thing. But she now can marry any of his relatives, and all the more so she can marry anyone in the world. We don't assume she's married and needs a divorce. Okay, case 2, flip. He omeret kidashani. She says he betrothed me. V'hu omer, and he says lo kidashtich. I did not betroth you. Now, in this case, hu mutar bekrovotah. He can marry any of her relatives. V'hi asura bekrovav. She can no longer marry any of his relatives. Okay, now she can't marry anybody really because she says I'm betrothed. But let's say he divorces her, he gives her a get. She now can't marry any of his relatives. Okay, well the truth is if he gives her a get, he also can't marry her relatives either because then she becomes his divorcee. But basically, she's now forbidden to any of his relatives forever. Let's say he's to die. Okay, she can't marry any of his relatives. Okay, but she also right now can't marry anybody. Case 3, kidashtich. He says, I betrothed you. She says, you didn't betroth me, you betrothed my daughter. You're a little confused, okay? You thought it was me, but really it's my daughter. Now, notice here, it's not shavia nafsha. She didn't make herself forbidden. He made himself forbidden to the woman, right? She claims it was her daughter. So now let's see what happens. Now, basically, you could have figured out all the cases in this Mishnah on your own once you got the first case. So the Gemara is going to ask, why do we need all these cases? But let's just read them anyway. So he said, I'm betrothed to the older woman. So hu asor bekrovot gedola. He's forbidden to all her relatives. Ugdola muteret bekrovav. Now she didn't think she was betrothed to him, so she's permitted to all of his relatives. Hu mutar bekrovot ktanana. When it comes to the younger one, he's obviously permitted to her relatives because he didn't say he was betrothed to her. And ktana muteret bekrovav. Now the ktana never admitted that she was betrothed. Only the mother did it. That's not shavia nafsha. That's not. She didn't make herself forbidden. She made her daughter forbidden, but that's meaningless. For the daughter, you can't forbid somebody else by your word alone. So therefore, the daughter is actually permitted to all his relatives. Next case, 4th case, and last case on the Mishnah. He comes and now says the flip case. I betrothed your daughter. V'hi married, and the mother comes and says, Lo kidasha eloti. What are you talking about? It was me you betrothed, not my daughter. So now, he assumes he's married to the daughter, he claims, so he can't marry any of her relatives. Obviously, the younger daughter, right? The daughter is not forbidden to anybody because she didn't admit to anything. He's permitted to the relatives of the older one because he didn't think he was betrothed to her, but the gedola, the mother, is forbidden to his relatives because she claims that he betrothed her. So again, you could have come up with this all on your own, but the Mishnah says it anyway. So now let's start with the first 2 cases. Why do you need to say, if he said it, I'm betrothed to you, and she didn't agree, or if she said, you betrothed me, and he didn't agree? They're really one and the same. Why do you need both? Well, there's actually a big difference. And I kind of mentioned it before, but now we'll talk about it. We don't really believe this guy because in the end, what did he do? Yeah, it's true he forbade himself to her relatives, but what's the big deal? So he now basically can marry anyone he wants in the world because by being betrothed to her doesn't preclude him from marrying other women because men in those days were able to marry more than one wife. All it precludes him is from marrying a handful of people, her relatives. Okay, he probably doesn't even like them, right? Who cares? So basically, his statement is not necessarily, he's not sacrificing a lot by making the statement, and therefore we don't really know if he's telling the truth or not. But aval ihi, ema ilav de kimlim bedibure lo havat amar. The litzar ihu bekrovoteha. But when she says, you betrothed me, what's she basically saying? I'm forbidden to everybody in the world. She has a lot at stake. So were it not to be true, maybe she really never would have said it. Because why would she make a statement? If he doesn't think he betrothed her, why would she say, you betrothed me? Which now forbids her to everybody in the world. So until she gets a get. So what? And then she's going to be a divorcee. Why would you ever do that if it were not true? So maybe we would say in that case, maybe we believe her. And therefore he'll be forbidden to her relatives as well. That's why they brought you case number 2 to show no, they're the same. She doesn't have the power to forbid him, even though likely, right, the logic would state that she's telling the truth. By the way, it's a great way, not that I want to recommend this to you, but it's a great way if for some reason this guy wants to marry your sister and you don't want him to marry your sister, she could just come along and say, oh, you betrothed me. And with that word, she can forbid him to marry the sister. So that's why you can imagine why it could theoretically be just a lie, even though she's sacrificing herself. But, you can imagine someone sacrificing herself potentially, maybe, I don't know that you would do this, but to save this, impending marriage with her sister that she doesn't want to happen. So, okay, let's go now to case 3. Again, reminds you of the Romeo and Juliet and people getting involved in, not wanting people to marry certain people. Okay, case number 3. Hatulamali. What do you need this case number 3? Where the mother, right? Again, you could have figured it all out on your own. You'd have to think about it all, but you figure it out. Okay. He says, I betrothed you. She says, no, it was my daughter. So again, the daughter never said anything. So the daughter's not forbidden to anyone because it's only you can make yourself forbidden to somebody. So now, why do we need this case? It's true. Why do we need it? Well, now let's think about it. What basically happened in case number 3? The mother claims the daughter was betrothed. Now, what did we learn about a father claiming the daughter is betrothed? We did that yesterday. A father has ne'emanut. Credibility. We believe a father when he said his daughter's betrothed, just his word alone. So therefore, maybe we believe a mother that her daughter's betrothed. So they're going to say the following. You might have thought, the Torah already gave credibility to a father to claim his daughter's betrothed, just his word alone. So you might have thought that maybe the rabbis came and said, well, let's give the mother the same power as we gave the father. Therefore, it comes to teach you, no, she doesn't have the same power. Okay, her word alone does not do anything as for the daughter. Case number 4. That's really not necessary because once we had case 1 and 2 and 3, for sure we don't need case 4, to which the Gemara kind of agrees. Why do you need that case? I did Tane Namiha. Well, it already set up case 1 and case 2 as parallel, and then there was case 3. So to balance out the Mishna, they gave case 4, which was kind of a parallel to case 3. So, but there really is, it's really not necessary. Now we're going to move into a machloket Rav and Shmuel, which first we're going to have to figure out on which case are they debating, and then we're not going to really understand the machloket. In the end, we're going to say they're actually not arguing; they're actually complementing each other. One is kind of adding to the other. So that's going to be the structure here. But first, we think it's a machloket. Rav Amar Kofin, Shmuel Amar Mivakshin. Rav says we force the husband in this case, now we don't know yet which case, to give the wife a get. Shmuel says we don't force it, we ask him to give her a get. We say it would be nice if he gave her a get, because remember, in some of these cases, the woman is now forbidden. She forbade herself, right? She now can't marry anybody. So we ask him to give her a get. So either we force it or we ask him. Ahaya, on which case is this referring to? Ilema Resha, if it's the first case, what was the first case? He said, I betrothed her. And she said, no, you didn't. Now, she's not forbidden to anybody. What does she need a get for, right? If it's that case, lav kofanika v'lo mavakshanika. First of all, not only does she not need a get because she's not forbidden to anybody, but if he were to give her a get, it would actually forbid her to his relatives. Because like a guy, for example, can't marry the grusha of his brother. So it's actually worse for her. So we don't do kofin and we don't do mavakshin. We don't want him to give her a get. Right, and obviously she'd now be a divorcee, which would be a problem. She can't marry a Kohen. Ela a seifa. So let's say it's about the seifa, meaning the second case, not the last case in the Mishna, but the second case. She says, you betrothed me, and he says no. But now we're going to have a bit of a problem. Because why? Okay, we get it, why we request, because like, be a nice guy. She thinks you're betrothed, give her a get. Ela kofin aman. How could you force him? Amal, he could say, as soon as he divorces her, what happens? He becomes, even though he claimed he wasn't betrothed to her, once he gives her a divorce, he's now forbidden to her relatives. So why would we be able to force him to create? He says, I never said we were betrothed. Why do I have to now sacrifice and forbid myself to her relatives? So therefore, it doesn't really make sense. This machloket, that really the opinion of Kofin, of Rav, doesn't make any sense. To which the Gemara says, this machloket, what they each said is really not a machloket. One is complementing the other or filling it in. How does that work? Well, really, Shmuel started. Amar Shmuel. We request, we say it would be nice if you gave her a get, because then it will free her up to marry anyone she wants. Right now, she's stuck. It's true, it's just her word alone, but it would be nice if you're a nice guy, give her a get. But Amar Rav said the following. Im natan get me'atzmo. If we didn't ask him to give a get, but he of his own volition came and said, listen, I'm going to give you a get, kofino totally tank ketuba. We force him to give her a ketuba. That's the forcing. The forcing is at the get. We say, if you remember the scene, she said, you betrothed me. He said, no, but then he gives her a get. Well, if he gives her a get, isn't he admitting that he really betrothed her? In which case, he has to give her the ketuba. And it could be he's lying to get out of giving her the ketuba. So as soon as he gives her a get, it's clear that he must be admitting a get. It's only if he does it of his own volition. If you ask him, then it's different, because then the court's asking him to do it, and then he does it for that reason. He doesn't have to give her ketuba money. But he does have to give her ketuba money if he gave the get on his own. Itmar Nami, it was also said, Amar Rav Acha bar Ada, Amar Rav, V'Amar Rav Acha bar Ada, Amar Rav Hamnuna, Amar Rav, either he said in the name of Rav, or he said in the name of Rav Hamnuna, who said in the name of Rav, Kofinu Mivakshin. They force him and they ask him, to which they said, what kind of, that makes no sense. Tarte, how could you say at the same time, they force him and they ask him? Hachi Kamar, what they meant is, Mivakshim Imenu Lateke get, so Rav was quoted as saying the exact same thing as we just explained in the name of Rav, right? We were trying to explain Rav. Now we have a statement where Rav actually said something, kofin and mavakshin, he said them together, to which they said the only possible way to understand that is we request, and if they don't listen, then kofin, if he decided to give the get on his own volition, though not from our request, as there's two masulim, there's kofin, which is we force him to give a ketuba because he gave the get on his own. If not, mivakshin. If he doesn't give it on his own, though, then we request the get, but then he doesn't have to pay ketuba money. That was all. So again, what we did so far, we brought the 4 cases in the Mishna. We discussed, right, where one says there was a betrothal, one says it wasn't, or one says it wasn't the same betrothal. Each person can forbid themselves to the relatives, but they can't forbid anybody else. To which we went through why each case is necessary. And then we went through in the case where she claims she was betrothed and he says not, we request him to give a get. And in the event that he gave it on his own, it's really an admission of Kiddushin, and we'd be able to force him to give the ketuba. Now we get to the issue of the witnesses, okay, that Debbie, you mentioned before in the chat, and now we're going to see it head on. Amar Rav Yehuda, HaMekadesh be'ed echad ein chosheshin l'kiddusha. If somebody betroths a woman with one witness, or obviously with no witnesses, then we don't worry that maybe the Kiddushin was valid. In other words, one witness does not affect Kiddushin. Okay, we're going to talk about this later as well. When it comes to witnesses, okay, there's different types of witnesses. There's what we call Edei Re'iyah, like Edim that saw something and just say this happened. And then there's Edim that are necessary for the action. Without the Edim, there's no action. If I take out a loan and we bring witnesses, or I take out a loan and we don't have witnesses to the loan, it doesn't matter. The loan is a loan, whether there's witnesses, there's no witnesses. If there's no witnesses, we might have some arguing about, you might say, you took out a loan, and I'll say, what are you talking about? I never borrowed the money. And then we have a whole issue. Or if there's one witness, then we can require me to take an oath about it if I claim it never happened. So there's certain things where one witness is valuable, but when you need the witnesses to affect the Kiddushin, and that's how it works with Kiddushin, and get without witnesses, it's not, if a guy just gives a woman a ring and says you're betrothed to me and nobody saw, there's no betrothal. So what about if one witness saw? Also, Rav Yehuda says no betrothal. Okay? You need the witnesses, it's necessary to have witnesses. Without witnesses, it's not a betrothal. And with only one witness, it's not. But they asked Rav Yehuda the following question. Rav Yehuda, Shnehem modim mai. What if there was one witness to the betrothal, and we both admit, me and my husband, that we were betrothed? Does that help? Does that mean that even though normally you need two witnesses, since now, if there's no witnesses, it's not going to work, even if we both admit. But because there was already one, okay, this is always a question. How do we view one witness? There are certain things that one witness is valid for. Because there was already one, and we admit it, perhaps we can say that this works. Okay, this is that we're betrothed. Again, it would be chosheshin. It would mean that you're betrothed at least misafek, and you would need a get. So now, what is his answer, Rav Yehuda? In velo v'rafya biyade. Sometimes he said yes, sometimes he said no, and he wasn't exactly clear about it. Okay, he didn't have a good answer to this question. Itmar, but now we're going to see a whole slew of rabbis who held that this is nothing, meaningless. Okay, we're going to start with Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel. I'm Rav Nachman, I'm Shmuel. HaMekadesh be'ed echad ein chosheshin l'kiddushav. We're not worried there was any sort of betrothal. Afilu shnei amudim. Even if both the man and the woman admit that there was a betrothal, one witness is not enough to affect Kiddushin. By the way, where does this come up nowadays? There's a case where the husband won't give a get. The first thing they try to do, the easiest way to do it, is to look back at the Kiddushin and say, if there weren't two kosher witnesses, let's say there was only one, let's say one was a good witness and the other one wasn't, then you can basically try to claim that it was not a valid Kiddushin, because without witnesses, it's not Kiddushin. Even though they both claim there was a marriage there, right? We can undo it based on this. The first thing we're going to do is question from our Mishna. And this is why, Debbie, you were right in saying, well, what about the witnesses here? Okay, so let's see. Now, what's the case? Were there witnesses? Were there not witnesses? Okay, right? No, what we basically seem to think is there were no witnesses because it was his word against her word. And that's why Debbie asked the question on the chat, but isn't there no Kiddushin without witnesses? This is exactly what the Gemara is going to say. If there were two witnesses, well, then obviously they're betrothed, and her word, the fact that she says, I wasn't betrothed, is meaningless. And therefore, my muteret b'krovav, she shouldn't be permitted to his relatives. It's clear there was a Kiddushin. If there's no witnesses, there's no way that this would be a betrothal without witnesses. So just by him saying, right, I'm betrothed to you, even though we said Shavi Nafsha Chaticha Yisura, not if it couldn't be possible. If there were no witnesses that witnessed the Kiddushin, even if he says there was Kiddushin, it doesn't make a difference. That's not Kiddushin. You need witnesses to affect the Kiddushin. So therefore, he wouldn't be forbidden to her relatives by his word alone. It must be there was one witness. And then we're going to say, that's why she's not forbidden because it's only one witness. But he's forbidden because he claims there was a Kiddushin. And if it was really true and the one witness is telling the truth, then it would actually be a betrothal, because what does it show here? One witness with the admission of the people themselves would be enough to say there's a Kiddushin. Now, in this case, she didn't agree, but he did, and that was enough for Shavia. But if there wasn't one witness, there is no such thing as Kiddushin without any witnesses. Okay? But this shows there is such a thing as Kiddushin with one witness. So they basically assume our Mishna must be talking about where there was one witness, and that's why it puts it in this in-between category, where it's enough to show there could have been a Kiddushin, and therefore by his word he could forbid himself. But she claims there wasn't, and we don't have two witnesses to corroborate his claim. So therefore, that's why she is not forbidden. But the Gemara says, why do you assume that's the case? And then that would, by the way, contradict what Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel. To which the Gemara said, why are you assuming that it couldn't be that there were no witnesses, or it had to be there? It definitely couldn't be there were no witnesses. But why do you assume it didn't happen with two witnesses? Maybe the Kiddushin happened with two witnesses. And what? He claims there was a betrothal with two witnesses, but he just says, listen, the witnesses are no longer here. No one has any testimony about it because the witnesses went abroad and we have no way to bring them. But his claim is there were two witnesses at the ceremony. And only because he claims that, then he can forbid himself. He can't forbid himself by saying, I betrothed her, I gave her a ring, said, and nobody was around to see. That wouldn't be, but he can claim that there were two witnesses, in which case, if there really were, then he'd be forbidden. And with that, he can forbid himself. And therefore, this has nothing to do with Eid Echad and it doesn't prove anything. Okay, let's go to question number 2. This time, we're going to bring a Mishna in Gittin Daf Pei Aleph. Mishna we learned already, and we did this whole sugya. 18. Hamigareshet ishto. A man divorces his wife, and the next thing you see is lana imo b'puntaki. Okay, not the next thing, but who knows when? At some point down the road, he goes to a hotel room with her, the two of them alone. Beit Shammai omrim, ein tzricha himenu get sheni. We don't assume that they have relations, l'shem Kiddushin, right? Kiddushin b'bi'ah, in that hotel, and therefore she doesn't need a get. Ubeit Hillel omrim, tzricha himenu get sheni. Beit Hillel says, what do you mean? They went to a room alone. They were married before. They went to a room alone. Probably they have relations in order to redo their marriage, but get betrothed, and therefore she needs a get from him again. Hechidami, again, assuming she wants to go get married to somebody else. So hechidami. Now notice it didn't say anything about witnesses. If there were witnesses that saw they have relations, then my Talmud Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai makes no sense. Why would you say she doesn't need a get? The witnesses saw there was Kiddushin. There was Kiddushin b'bi'ah. They have relations. If nobody saw what happened there, my Talmud Beit Hillel. Why does Beit Hillel say that she needs a get? Right? If there were no witnesses, again, what did we say? There's no Kiddushin unless there were witnesses. So Beit Hillel can't require a get and assume they were betrothed if there were no witnesses. So what must it be? Again, why is there this two things pulling in different directions, like with our Mishnah? With our Mishnah, it wasn't a machloket, but same kind of question. Must have been there was one witness. And basically what we're going to have is Beit Shammai says one witness is not enough, and Beit Hillel says one witness is enough to affect Kiddushin, and therefore we have to assume there was Kiddushin, right? We basically view this as if there was Kiddushin. Because one witness saw them have relations. So now what do you see here? One witness is good to affect Kiddushin if, right, in the Shnei Modim case, or in this case where, there was already reason to believe that they were doing it l'shem Kiddushin because they were already married before. Okay, so now they say no. That doesn't make any sense to read the Mishnah in the way you just read it, okay? The way we just read it raises a question with what Shmuel had said, or Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel. Now they say, but you didn't read the end of that Mishnah. Look at the end of that Mishnah. It makes no sense according to what you're saying. If the divorce, the original divorce, was only from betrothal, which means they had never had relations together before, Beit Hillel agrees with Beit Shammai that he doesn't need to give her another get. Why? Since they never had relations before, we don't assume that they have relations in this situation. Now, what did we just assume? We just assumed there was one witness that saw them have relations. If there was one witness that saw them have relations, then obviously that whole claim is irrelevant. If ainli bo gaspa, well then, we assume they didn't have relations, but he saw them have relations. So they did have relations. So something doesn't jive here. If you think one witness is believed, what does it matter? If one witness saw them have relations, it doesn't matter whether they were betrothed the first time or not, or even married the first time. He saw them have relations, right? Again, libo gaspa means we don't assume that they have relations, but he saw they have relations. So you can't make any assumptions when there's a truth in front of our face. So therefore, he says it can't be that there was one witness, because if there was one witness, and that's the whole machloket between them, and Beit Hillel basically saying one witness would be good to affect Kiddushin, well, that can't possibly be the machloket because it makes no sense with the end of the Mishnah. And this is how we eventually understood that case also in Gittin. It's not that the witnesses saw him having relations with this woman. They just saw that he went to a room alone with her. They saw them go into a hotel room and lock the door. Okay? That's all they saw. There were Eidei Yichud that saw them go into a room alone, but not Eidei Bia. And now the machloket is the following. Beit Shammai Savre, Beit Shammai hold, turning out Amubet, Amrinan, Hein Eidei Yichud, Hein Eidei Bia. If you see two people who are married to each other, who got divorced, who now go into a hotel room alone, lock the door, that's enough to basically assume that they have relations. Ubeit Hillel Savre, I said it wrong. Beit Shammai say, Lo Amrina. We don't say that. We don't assume just because we saw them go into a room alone that they're going to have relations. And that's why he doesn't need to give her another get. Ubeit Hillel Savre, Beit Hillel hold, Hein Eidei Yichud, Hein Eidei Bia. Beit Hillel say, no. You saw them have Yichud, you can assume they had Bia. You assume if they went to a room alone and they've been married before, they must have had Yichud. And that's why Beit Hillel makes perfect sense now about the difference between Erusin and Nisuin. Umodim vadai benitgarshim in Erusin to lo amrin an hen Eidei Yichud hen Eidei Bia mipnei she'en to go baspa. But if they went into this room alone and they've never had relations before, then we don't assume they have relations. Again, if they were only betrothed and never had relations in the first relationship before they got divorced, we don't assume they have relations now. And therefore, even Ben Hillel would agree in that case, there's no machloket. Okay? And yes, that's what I said before, Dina. This is exactly the same machloket we saw. This was all in Gittin Daf Pei Aleph, and this is how in the end we explain this machloket. So basically, what we did so far in this section, okay, let's just go back to the Mishna to do some review and get us back on track. We have 4 cases, right? There were sets of 2 and 2, where, each one said something like that. And then we went into the why we needed each case. Okay, we discussed what the chiddush of each case was, even though the last case really had no chiddush. Then we got to this machloket about kofin and mevakshin, which we then say doesn't make any sense. So we re-explained that machloket to say really what they're saying is kofin to give a ketuba in the case where the husband gives the get on his own. The other track is to do mevakshin. We ask him to give a get, and that's in the case where the woman says she was betrothed and the husband doesn't think she was. Then we got to this case about Eid Echad. And they asked Rav Yehuda, he didn't really know what to say. And then Shmuel basically is quoted by Rav Nachman as saying, if there was one witness to the Kiddushin, and both the man and the woman agree that there was a Kiddushin, the Kiddushin is valid, which basically means we don't think the Kiddushin is valid, my mistake. We don't worry about Kiddushin because Eid Echad is not enough. There is no betrothal affected by one witness. Okay, there is no such thing. Without 2 witnesses at a wedding, there is no wedding. Okay, that is not a betrothal. So now, from there, we asked a question from our Mishnah because we assumed our Mishnah must be talking about where there was one witness, to which we said, no, it's not. Okay. Then we brought this other Mishnah in Gittin, which would sound like there was only one witness that saw the betrothal, to which we said that's not the case. There were 2. It was just that they didn't see the bia, they didn't see the relations, they only saw them go into the room alone. And that's where we get into this machlok. Now we're going to see again another psak just like Shmuel in the name of Rav. Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta Mishmei de Rav hamekadesh be'ed echad ein chosheshin lekidushav afilu shnehem modim. Exact same psak. One witness saw the kiddushin. Both spouses admit that there was kiddushin. Irrelevant. We don't view this as kiddushin. And Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna hamekadesh be'ed echad be'dina Rabba Amrei ein chosheshin lekidushin. And Rabba bar Rav Huna said the same thing. He just said it in the name of the Beit Din Hagadol. He said the Beit Din Hagadol said, the big court ruled that we don't worry about Kiddushin. There's no such thing as Kiddushin with one witness. Man Beit Din Rabba. What is this great Beit Din that Rav Huna was talking about? Rav. Okay? Rav, and basically that means we have one person quoting Rav, we have another person quoting Rav saying the same thing. But Ikada Amri, there's a different version. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. The Rav bar Rav Huna said his statement in the name of Rav already, that Hamekadesh be'ed echad be'dina Rabba Amrei ein chosheshin lekidushav, which means basically that Rav was quoting it in the name of the Beit Din Gadol, which would have to be somebody else then. Man Beit Din Rabba Rebbi. So basically, in a nutshell, what we have is we have basically that Rav agreed with Shmuel about this issue that Rav Nachman quoted, that we don't worry about Kiddushin with one witness. But again, we're going to bring another question to this. Mativ Rav Achterboy Bar Ami. He brought this question against Rav's Pesach now. It's the same basic idea that we're questioning this shita. A braita. Okay, it kind of sounds like a bit of a joke. Okay, it seems like a pretty theoretical case. Shnayim Shabam Midinat Hayam. We have 2 guys coming from abroad, meaning we don't know who they are. They come out of the blue, 2 people show up. V'ishai mahem, and there's a woman. So 2 men and a woman are walking on the street. V'chavilaimo, and they have a package with some money in it or something. Ze omer. So guy number 1 says, Zoishti v'zavdi v'zochavilati. The woman's mine. I married her. The slave is mine. The second guy is my slave. He's a Canaanite slave, and he's owned by me. And the chavila is mine, and the money or whatever it is in that package that's worth money is mine. So basically, he claims rights to everything. Vizelmer, guy number 2, says the same thing. I'm a Jew. Zoishti, this is my wife. Zavdi, this is my slave. The other guy is my slave. He claims I'm his slave. He's my slave. Vizo chavilati, and this package belongs to me. Ve'isha omeret, elu shnei avadai. She claims it's all hers. She says, these both, they're slaves. They're my slaves. Ve'chavila sheli, and the package is mine. Well, tzricha shnei gitin. She needs get from guy number 1, get from guy number 2, because each claim they betrothed her. V'govak tubatam min chavila. And she can get her ketuba from the chavila. In other words, no matter what, the chavila is hers. She can have a claim to it, let's say. Number 1, she could claim it's mine. That's what she claims. If guy number one was right, that he betrothed her, and then he gives her a get, he has to give her a ketuba, so she could take her ketuba from the chavilah. Guy number two also claims he betrothed her and now is divorcing her, so he has to give her the ketuba based on that. So basically, if the chavilah is worth 200 zuz, she gets the whole chavilah. Worth 400 zuz, she'll get half of it, and the other half either will be split or left till Eliyahu comes to decide, whatever we do in general with Mammon that three people claim rights to. Okay, that's a whole. We'll get to that all in Bava Metzia. So now, Hechidami. Now, what's the case? The question is, were there witnesses? Were there not witnesses? Now, remember, if there were no witnesses and they claim they betrothed her, they don't have to give her a get, and she doesn't need a get because she's not forbidden to them, right? Because that was our Mishna. So let's see. Hechidam. Idi lesade lahai lesade lahai. If they both have witnesses that corroborate their case, mi matze amre elu shnei avadai v'chavila sheli. She can have, her claim is irrelevant. If they each bring witnesses that she's betrothed to me, then clearly she has no claim. Okay, and that's not what's clear from this case. Elalad be'ed echad. It must be there was one witness. Okay, and then what do you see here? Each claim they betrothed her with one witness. And now what do you see? One witness is enough to assume there was a betrothal because they need to give her a get. So that means that one witness is effective, and that goes against what they said. One witness with both admitting isn't effective. You need two witnesses. There's no such thing as Kiddushin without two witnesses. This can't be two witnesses. So it would have to be one, to which they say, how could you possibly say this is one witness? Each one had a claim of one witness, and one witness proves there's something to it. You can't say it's because they each had a witness. This is his witness against his witness. They each, right? He says, I betrothed her. The other one said, I betrothed her. They can't both be right, which means it's as if there's zero witnesses because they each contradicted each other. This isn't a case of one witness because the one witness was knocked out by the other one witness. So therefore, we have to explain this case totally differently, and therefore it's not a difficulty. Actually, she doesn't need to get from each of them. She's definitely not married because neither had a witness, and this goes back to our Mishna. Neither one had a witness, or each one had one witness. It doesn't matter. Their witnesses contradict each other. It's as if they have no witnesses. She's actually permitted to everybody because she never claimed and they don't have a claim on her. But so why does it say she needs two gets from them, right? A get from each, and she gets her ketuba from the chavilah? Well, what they meant to say is, if she wants to claim the chavilah, she can do it if they each give two gets to her. If each guy gives her a get, then she has rights to the chavilah, as we say, as mimanavshach. No matter what, it's hers. Either it's hers because she's right, or it's hers because this guy gave her a get and he has to give her ketuba, or that guy gave her a get and has to give her a ketuba. So basically, this has nothing to do with one witness, and therefore it doesn't contradict anything we just said. And you'd have to add one more thing, which you might remember from ketubot. Usually we say land is leaned to the ketuba, and she could collect her ketuba from land. This assumes that she collects her ketuba from movable property because the chavilah is a movable item, and therefore it would have to be only according to Rabbi Meir's approach that says that you can actually collect the ketuba from movable property. Now the Gemara says we had so far all these rabbis say one witness, right? Shmuel and Rav both say one witness is not enough to affect Kiddushin, even if both sides agree. But we asked all these questions on them, and even though we answered them, the Gemara wants to know my havila. Really, what's the story? So now we go to later Amoraim. Rav Kahana Amar en choshishin lekidushav. Rav Kahana supports what we've been saying until now. Rav Papa Amar choshishin lekidushav. Rav Papa says we actually are concerned. He's the only guy we saw who says we're concerned for Kiddushin. Now you would have expected we're going to start getting questions on Rav Papa, but no, they're going to go back and again ask a question on Rav Kahana, Paskins like Rav and Shmuel that we just saw. I'm really Rav Ashi the Rav Kahana. I don't really understand your opinion. My date, what do you think? Is it because we learned davar mi mamon? It says al pishnayim edim yakum davar, which is in monetary issues, you have to bring two witnesses. And therefore, it says kim tzab ervat davar when it comes to the get pasuk that we've seen many times. Therefore, we're going to say, there it says davar, there it says davar. There you need two witnesses also for betrothal and marriage status issues. You need two witnesses. If it's learned out from mamonot, but wait. Well, there's a principle in monetary law. If I admit that I owe you money and there's no witnesses, it's as if there were 100 witnesses that come and say, I owe you money. I confess. So a confession is worth 100 witnesses. So what's the difference if you need two witnesses? You have 100 witnesses now because they both admit. So Rav Kahana, you should say the same thing here. Basically, if you're using monetary law as a paradigm, the monetary law should tell you that in this case, they're betrothed. To which he says, no, there's a big distinction. If I admit I owe you money, who's getting messed up by this? Me and me alone. Okay? I'm like, I'm not making anybody else do anything they don't want to do. It's just me who now needs to pay. But if she claims and he claims that they're betrothed, what happens now? Well, they're affecting other people negatively. They're now creating isurim for other people. Now, her sister can't marry that guy, and his brother can't marry her. It affects other people, not just the two of them. And that's why their admission is not accepted. Okay, that's basically what we conclude. We're going to start now this next section, which is basically going to talk about monetary law, make a comparison. And this is where I started, where I said that witnesses in Kiddushin affect the betrothal. So without two witnesses, basically you don't have a betrothal. That's what all these rabbis are saying, other than Rav Papa, who thinks that one witness is enough if both sides admit. But everybody else seems to say not, because the witnesses in Kiddushin are not witnesses that just testify that something transpired. They're witnesses that create the Kiddushin. Without witnesses, it's nothing. Marzutra of Rav Ada Saba b'nei Rav Mary bar Isur. Okay, these two people, they were splitting up the inheritance of their father. Atu the Kamed Rav Ashi, they came before Rav Ashi, Amrule. They said to him, is the reason why the Torah said we need two witnesses, is it because we're worried that somebody might lie and claim, what do you mean? I didn't give you that land. I wanted that land and I never gave that to you. And if that's the case, we don't really need witnesses here while we distribute the property because we're trustworthy. O Dilma, or perhaps Lo Makayim Milta Ela B'Sadeh, or is it possible that there will be no distribution of property? It's not really considered my property if we don't do it in front of witnesses. They basically wanted to know, do we need witnesses? Exactly this question, right? Is it like Kiddushin, that without the Kiddushin, it's as if we didn't divide the land? So, to which he answers them, Amar lo ibru sadeh ela l'shakeh. The only reason for witnesses are to prevent lying. And if you guys are trustworthy and you trust each other, you don't need to divide it with witnesses. So there's your end, right? Again, that just sets up the distinction between property and monetary law and Kiddushin and Nisuin, where you do need a Gittin also. You need witnesses to affect the transaction. Without witnesses, it's nothing. Okay, then we had a whole thing, Edim Sira or Edim Chatima and Get, right? If you remember. So we're going to stop here for today, and we're going to go back to this issue about whether witnesses, are the ones who affect things, or are they just needed to clarify things, and we'll talk about that more as we go on. Wishing everybody a good day, and we'll end here for today.